November 5th, 8:14 p.m. I'm just thinking about this, the diesel fuel shortage that was reported in CNBC that is going to occur in 2 weeks and picked up by Tucker Carlson and Prepper Communities, and the announcement by Mansfield Oil in the southeast that they're at code red and they'll be running out of diesel fuel. I have a tendency to think that that was CNBC disinformation. That while that it's going to be a crisis, but it isn't going to be everything halting, and that when the crisis comes, there will be shortages, and then people will be relieved to find out that it's not a full stoppage, but prices are going to be jacked up through the roof because that's coming. Biden's completely exhausted the strategic oil reserve now. That was the only thing keeping gasoline prices down, and it was done leading up to the election. So it was timed. I mean, nothing that's being done isn't planned and isn't timed, including the release by CNBC reporting. That's the main business news organ for people who watch television to get their financial news from. So that's likely the case, but it's limited. They're presenting it as it's a full scale diesel fuel shortage. Anyway, it's almost impossible. I mean, it's not almost. It is impossible to know what's real and what isn't real when it comes to what the media says about what's going to happen in 2 weeks or in the future. What you do know is that the exhaustion of the strategic oil reserve has happened, and what you do know is that the diesel fuel is at a historic low going back to 2008 with the last international global financial crisis. So that's coming without any doubt. And as far as the what's going on in Ukraine, I'm going to switch over to that now.
Or are we simply creating a hook? Is this a device to drag us into a war that under normal circumstances we would never support?
So what would happen if American troops on the ground confront Russian troops? I mean, if you're Vladimir Putin or one of his generals, you're going to want to destroy the strongest component of your adversary, which would be the American military. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And even more important, Judge, people in this country don't understand that the Russian nation is enraged. It really is. The average Russian is offended and angry. He wants to get us out of Ukraine. He sees us as the clear and present danger. This is not a question of Putin dragging Russia into something. The Russians want blood, and I can tell you that they would like nothing better than to have served up on the platter in Western Ukraine thousands of U.S. combat troops. And they would concentrate every capability at their disposal, short of a nuclear weapon, to annihilate it. And this is not a time for us to step into something and be beaten and be defeated. There's no gain for us in any of this. It's not necessary.
I'm going to put a map on the screen, which you helped us create, to show the size of the countries compared to the United States. The red, the pink, is Ukraine. The blue is Poland. If you look down to where it says Louisiana, that's where Romania is. You have opined that if there is some sort of a coalition, it might include Poland and Romania. You have also told us that Ukraine is roughly the size of Texas. If you can imagine picking up the pink and moving it to the left, it is just about the size of Texas. And of course, over where it says South Carolina and Georgia, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where Russia is.
Exactly. Absolutely. And because we don't border Ukraine, The danger for us, if we involve ourselves militarily, begins to be one of resupply, sustainment. How do you provide for the forces? How do you replace your losses? How do you bring in more equipment? And that means that you leave from ports from New York all the way down to Corpus Christi and head to Europe. Well,
Anyway, where have we heard that before in terms of the U.S. going over to another country that wants our blood, that is all too happy to see Americans come over for a fight? Remember 9/11? Remember what happened in what Osama? I love the rhyming that there always is in these words. Osama and Obama, Barack Hussein, Obama, and what the result of this is going to be even worse a catastrophe than it was when we took the bait of Osama bin Laden. That's what really destroyed America was, this little group of terrorists lure America all the way over to Afghanistan, just like in Vietnam, and then we just go from one Middle East disaster to another after that. It's always double down. What we failed here, let's double our money. We'll win this time. We'll go with the next bet. We lost that one. Oh, just print some more money. We'll go up against Ukraine. None of it. It's obviously just a slaughterhouse. And that's all I have to say about that. But I'm just showing that this is the reality, and the American news media is simply conning everybody with this notion that Zelensky and Ukraine, and it's conning Americans. Europeans aren't buying it. They're not sending any troops over. Even the British are not sending any troops. They're all for the war. Just send Americans and Chechens or Polish troops or whoever is crazy enough to want to go into a war where they're outnumbered, 100-1 on the turf, which is going to be in the winter against the most formidable army that's ever existed in winter conditions that the Germans didn't defeat and that Napoleon didn't defeat in the 19th century and in the 20th century. So in the 21st century, just like McGregor's pointing out, with no lines of supply, with no, we're already out of oil. Russia has OPEC. Russia has an unlimited number of soldiers. It can keep calling up. It's already, we're talking about, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 troops. So Russia's mobilized, it's going to mobilize up to 700,000 troops. They've got 300,000 mobilized now. What can you say? Anyway, just reality news. Hold on. The next thing, go to something here, which is on a similar subject. It's connected.
Order, but God was showing me how dangerous and murderous modern America is, even without the beast system being established. This is a world all on its own, this one continent of murder, spying, threats, and serious intimidation behind the scenes. God was showing me in this prophecy that many ordinary people in this country are caught in a cat and a mouse game for their very lives. Their families are endangered when they speak up. They lose their lives if they become whistleblowers. Sometimes they're forced to go on the run and take up a foreign citizenship in order to stay alive, just because they exposed the wickedness of, we'll just call it the enterprise, because the U.S. government is definitely not the normal political animal that most countries are used to. It definitely is an enterprise working to firmly establish itself until it opens one day like a rotten coconut and show us the iron kingdom beneath. So this dream showed me that there are very powerful interests out there in this country. And those interests think nothing of extinguishing human life like a little cheap candle if anyone tries to expose or reveal their end times plans. before they're ready. This prophecy is about food insecurity, famine, the shortening of food, the disappearance of basic food, and how more and more people are going to end up having to go on welfare. I have spoken of this many times, that God shows me in the dream the typification of homelessness and poverty as you see it in the American movies. So you're watching a movie and you can always tell the homeless character, because he's going to be wearing so many clothes and bundled up so much if it's winter. And there's always these gloves that they wear that have no fingertips. So it's the cut off fingertip gloves that you know, this person is homeless. I saw that there came the rise of homelessness in every state, and I have seen that represented in so many dreams, that people will not be able to hold body and soul together. They're going to lose.
Okay, you get the picture. And the connection is that the people who are homeless and mentally ill, a large portion of them are the people maimed and driven crazy with shell shock, it used to be called, which is what it is. They're traumatized in these wars, and they're poisoned also by depleted uranium, or going back to napalm, or they're ill in many cases. Mental illness comes along with physical deterioration of brains exposed to these poisonous chemicals in war, as well as the drugs used to treat people who have to have their limbs taken off, and all of this, the powerful effects of painkillers and addiction to painkillers. So the two things are connected, and that we continue to exhaust our own people, not we. This is the enterprise is doing it. The enterprise is doing it, and particularly younger Americans just have this knee-jerk reaction, but older ones as well, who are just as crazy, that buy into this thing that we're winning one for the Gipper. We'll keep winning them for the Gipper while we lose them for the Gipper. And the Gipper's long gone, and now we have Skippy. Skippy's up there, and he's even calling Republican voters idiots that say they don't want socialism, and this isn't socialism, it's communism is what it is. I mean, communism is when you have a dictatorship, when a president and his military and his cabinet, without even consulting Congress, can declare war and then put the economy into an emergency status, and he can sign documents when he comes into office, canceling the oil industry, moving subsidies over to these electric cars and wind turbines and solar panels, which are not going to supply any reliable source of energy without any transition. And secondly, there's the insanity of what we're finding out about the ineffectiveness of all of this. There's a lawsuit now with soldiers that has just been filed, that have had adverse effects from mandated vaccines, and that is going to be adjudicated in the future. So I have no idea where that's going, except to say that there's massive health issues with American citizens that have to do with diet, that have to do with what Celestial's referencing, scarcity. When you have scarcity and you have poor people, you feed them jelly donuts. I mean, that's what they did to the Native Americans, right? They were subsidized with food. It was all the absolutely unnutritious food. So they come up with alcoholism and kidney failure. They're on kidney dialysis machines. That's what is the plan by the enterprise. And like she says, I mean, Americans don't want to hear it because they can't hear it. At this point, so many of them are in so much addiction to one thing or another, to neural links and to video games, and to these notions that we are the superpower of the world, which we're not anymore. We haven't been for a long time, and we are going to spiral down really rapidly. And people who aren't prepared for it are just going to be being hit by one blow after another. And particularly the prepper community, which is reacting. They're in a constant state of emergency, and they have been for years, expecting exactly what's going to happen, except they're still buying into we've got to defeat these foreign enemies, so we have to go fight them over there instead of fighting them here, and Russia's going to invade. It's self-fulfilling prophecy is what I'm saying. This is all self-fulfilling prophecy. And the continual brainwashing and propaganda from every different direction, by the left and by the right. If there's one thing they agree on, it's war spending and war spending and war after war after war. The Europeans want no part of it. They've seen what's going. They are well aware. Even the governments will have been going along with it, but not the people. They're out in the street rioting because they see the result of it is they're not going to have any heat this winter. They are going to be freezing to death. And that's a certainty. And also the prices of food and the prices of essentials are going through the roof, and people are losing their jobs. So there is this time for Americans to recognize, just like Jimmy Carter said, and just like Macron said now. Jimmy Carter is called, he's what is Malaise speech. And you have Macron is giving his Malaise speech, but it's a reality check. It's that, you've had all of these entertainment luxuries and movies and fine food and death metal concerts and saber rattling against countries that you're accepting refugees now by the score who don't, does Ayatollah Khomeini, who was housed so he could plan his revolution in Iran. He was in Paris and supported by the French socialists. And now, do the Ayatollahs have the French best interest at heart? I don't think so. So now we're at war against the same enemies that we meaning the West, wants socialism or wants communism. Well, it's not going to work here any better than it worked in communist China or communist Russia or communist Cuba or communist Nicaragua or any of the the communist Americas. It's dark days ahead. And this is the reality of who the Ukrainians are, who we're going over. Not only are we going over to get involved in a war, but we're on the wrong side, because the Ukrainians Zelensky is a dictator and he's a war criminal. Even Pink Floyd's what's his name, Roger Waters, has said that Biden's a war criminal, Zelensky's a war criminal. That this is the true picture of what's happening in Ukraine and where it's going.
I'm your host, Palak Kashyap. Let's begin. Ukrainian armed forces are operating against all the rules of war against Russia. They have violated every Geneva Convention and international humanitarian law that exists on the planet. Zelensky and the Ukrainian regime are so blinded by the fantasy of victory that they are killing the same Ukrainians they vowed to protect in the first place. As the brutal Zelensky government continues to disregard international humanitarian laws, Russian authorities have expanded the relocation of citizens from frontline regions in Kherson region to a 15-kilometer zone on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. According to present acting regional governor Vladimir Saldo, people will be evacuated to neighboring Russian regions or to areas of Kherson that are farther from the front lines. The urgent action, according to Saldo, will protect residents from Kiev's banned methods of war, and the possibility that Ukrainian forces could launch missiles at a dam at the Kakhovka hydropower plant, which is upstream from Kherson, perhaps creating a situation of a devastating flood. He added that the action will also improve the region's defense against a northward Ukrainian attack. Kherson region was annexed by Russia after the referendum it held a month ago. Russia has full control of the oblast at the moment. However, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is relentlessly aiming to target Kherson citizens. Kherson is being targeted by Ukraine because it would also open the gateway towards Crimea. Since it doesn't have the means for a well fought war against Russia, it has resorted to criminality against the same people it claims to be its own. The humanitarian group Amnesty International also had listed incidents in which Ukrainian forces appeared to have exposed civilians to danger in 19 towns and villages in the Kharkiv, Donbas, and Mykolaiv regions. The report exposed Zelensky and his precarious regime, which had so far presented itself in pious and saintly light. With the attack on Kakhovka Dam, Ukraine will violate another Geneva Convention. If Ukrainian forces blow up this dam, more than 80 towns, including Kherson, will come into the zone of rapid flooding. It will threaten the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people. And it is quite predictable that Ukraine, after mining the dam, will blame Russia for the attack. Consequently, whatever Ukraine propagates will be considered as the absolute truth by the Western media. But Russia has no reason to do so as it already sits comfortably in Kherson. However, it be blamed like it was blamed for the Crimean bridge bombing and the Nord Stream pipelines episode by the Western media. The collapse of the dam will cause a massive area to go under the flood and rob the southern Ukraine of its water supplies. It might also put Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in jeopardy. Nuclear experts warn that while this scenario would be unpleasant and dangerous, its effects probably wouldn't be felt right away, but surely in the near future. Furthermore, the regions which have been annexed by Russia are the key to Ukraine's natural resources, including energy and mineral deposits. Based on the Washington Post study of 2,209 deposits, Moscow controls 63% of Ukraine's coal, 11% of its oil, 20% of its natural gas, 42% of its metals, and 33% of its rare earths, including key minerals like lithium. But once again, the region is flooded. It will lead to a crisis which will put the mineral deposits out of the scenario for the time being. Zelensky's disregard for human life is leading him to commit extreme and deadly acts on his own citizens. Zelensky has realized that the small victories in the counteroffensive aren't sustainable, and he needs to do something substantial to remain in the spotlight. Therefore, he has decided to carry out an economic genocide in Ukraine on his own people.
And that's what we're in the middle of right here. I mean, by committing, it's like $63 billion now, 62 or $63 billion that we've sent over to this sinkhole that's collapsing, that's collapsed. And those are war crimes, yeah, but they're not being committed by Russia. That they're being committed by NATO. The British blew the Nord Stream pipeline. The Crimea Bridge was Britain. The attack on the grain shipments going to the starving people in the third world with a Russian convoy escorting them. This is all being done. And the Amnesty International is a human rights organization that points out war crimes and is seeing that these are war crimes, but it's also genocide against his own people. They don't care. The enterprise, as Celestial calls it, the enterprise isn't your friend. This whole nationalism is that it's nationalism for multinational corporations. It's not nationalism for American citizens' interests. And we're going to end up just like everybody else in Europe with failed crops, with hyperinflation. Everything that's being said on the Western media is a lie. If they're trying as furiously as possible to just keep, we just invaded Haiti, or let's go into another war. It's impossible to even follow Oh, and there's threats against Iran now by the Biden administration, and threats against Saudi Arabia, and threats against South Africa. Who knows what the surprise is going to be? Who knows what there is going to? There's just one surprise after another. But after the election, there's going to just be cascading surprises, and I can't imagine that this election is going to go off without all kinds of accusations, depending on what happens in these various machine-controlled districts all over the place. I mean, for one thing, they're gerrymandered. For the other thing, they have corrupt uh, officials without pointing to which ones are corrupt and which ones aren't. We all know that there hasn't been an American election for decades that hasn't been dubious in one way or another, going back to the Kennedy uh, Nixon event in Chicago with Mayor Daley. Oh boy, if I got a headache these days. Let's see, 26 minutes. Let me see what else there is. And here's a few reminders. Psalm 1463, do not put your trust in princes, nor in a son of man in whom there is no help. That's where America is. It seems that most of the people are believing in their church or their pastor or their celebrity idols or their military leaders or their Department of Homeland Security directives or their news media or some human voice that's interpreting God. And that is the wrong person to, it's always, it doesn't matter how truthful, how much knowledge they have, to ever put your trust in a prince. That's Machiavelli's The Prince. A powerful person is always going to be misplaced. And as far as this revelation, let's go back to the revelations. This is, I don't know who it is. I just see these things and I pull them up out of the blue because that's what comes to me.
And that's really all I need to know. And that's all really you need to know.
That Revelation 18:2, that's all you need to know. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. What you need to know is that the victory is to God, and the victory over evil is going to be swift and decisive, and it's going to come in an instant. And up until then, God is allowing all of this evil to flourish and temptation. And Babylon has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every unclean and hated bird. And the birds of a feather are flocking together. And how about the plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl, as a demon? And how about Americans and Europeans and modernists, modern people not thinking that there's such a thing as demons and that there's such a thing as dark forces and occult forces, and that the Aleister Crowley Thelema religion is not a satanic religion, and that Baphomet is not a real entity, and that all of the occult is really something that is a figment of people's imagination. It's not a figment of people's imagination. It's perfectly real, and it's perfectly deadly. And in 1810, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And my belief is that this is Babylon, that America It checks all the boxes for the Babylon the Great, the only city that's described as great in the Bible, Babylon the Great, and America is the greatest. It's going to be made great again. It's going to return to its former greatness. It's the greatest generation. It's the greatest number one. I mean, we are number one. We'll always be number one. What other country has referred to itself as number one? I mean, this is like a country that has no coherence, and just like Babylon, that people are broken down into how many Protestant denominations are there? Hundreds and hundreds or thousands, and that's just in the Christian religion. And how many other cult religions? There's a cult on every block, and even within the Baptists, there are 5 Baptist churches in the town, and each one has a different charismatic prince or leader that is where people are going to be part of this one little select community rather than to see themselves as part of the entire body of Christ, which spans the whole globe. Their brothers and sisters in Nigeria and in Russia and in the Ukraine, instead of what's America's habit? To demonize Russia, to demonize Afghanistan, to demonize the Palestinians, to demonize the Arabs, the Muslims, and you name it. And then to say, oh, but that's okay if they believe in the American way of life, which is what? Which is the pleasure dome. It's not a Christian way of life. The American way of life is to do whatever there was. It's Aleister Crowley's way of life, whose law, the only law is do as thou wilt. Do whatever feels good. Just do it. Just have no fear. Just, get on a cannonball run at 180 miles per hour and go like a fireball as fast as you can into the wall. We're given sound minds, but we're not using those sound minds. And again, Isaiah 13:19, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And if there's ever any city I can think of that's like Sodom and Gomorrah, it would be the Las Vegas, San Francisco, New York City, Rainbow Pride in the desert of Burning Man. These are outrightly pagan ceremonies of reconstituted Game of Thrones paganism. And it's throughout the Christian and the Catholic Church now. And these spectacles of Hollywood, Dionysian, Cleopatra, the Burton and Liz Taylor. Liz Taylor was on all of the same drugs as the Warhol crowd, and those were the drugs that Hitler's Panzer battalions were on. JFK was on it. This is, Cary Grant has taken how many LSD trips to reconstitute his personality along with psychosis is what comes out of lots of LSD trips. I know what lots of LSD trips lead to, and they don't lead to enlightenment. The same thing with smoking pot every day. It doesn't lead to enlightenment. The same thing with drinking alcohol and medications every day. They don't lead to a higher state of awareness or they don't lead to a higher state of consciousness or peace. And the peace is the peace of God, and that is not to have hate, not to have anger, not to go to war, not to envy, not to have vanity, constantly putting on costumes and cosmetics and what have you, dancing and not to be constantly envying, wanting this, I want that. Oh, I've got to be in my dream home. This place isn't where I want to be, and my neighbor has a lot nicer view than I do, and it's a constant state. That's what consumerism depends on. It depends on making people think that their life it has to be improved because what it is now is not fulfilling enough, that God isn't enough, that just being able to read scripture and just being able to obey and being simple and humble servant isn't enough, that you have to somehow be a big superstar and you have to be at a superstar church with all the other superstars, depending on what that church is, or you have to be at the front of the line, going off and to a troop transport or a convoy here or a convoy there, that just being in one place and with limited power, because Jesus isn't into power. You notice that. He's not into worldly power. He's into this battle against the temptations of Satan. And that's a real battle. That's a real battle. The battle for your mind is the real battle. The battle between the temptations of the world and the devil and the lusts of the flesh and the carnality and your better angels of your nature, as Lincoln put it. But it's not the better angels of your nature. It's obedience to God and love of God. As Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. That's the way you display your love of God, is by keeping the commandments. Anyway, I just thought I'd give an example of what I'm talking about with American psychosis. Americans they're the intellectual class, and their heads are so far up their asses, they can't see anything but fecal matter. And this is so much bullshit. I just can't tell you
Frozen and how they are, and they're just much more like
how
in
bizarre
themselves.
this is.
Is because people who are drawn to live in Boulder are usually emotionally complex and very intellectual people. And when you have a society of emotionally complex people, you're obviously going to have emotionally complex problems within that society. And here's me, Genevieve, thinking I'm like the smartest person in Boulder. Also, every person in Boulder thinks they're the smartest person in Boulder. And I loved that I just had my own ego blown up because this guy made an observation that I honestly had never realized. I kind of was living in my own shadow, thinking that people in Boulder are just like kind of assholes and living in their ivory tower thinking they know what's best for everyone when really they don't, because they're just douchey. But really, it's like he was saying the truth. It's that we're all very emotionally complex people. We live in Boulder because we want a better world. We're in an ivory tower trying to work it all out because we want things to be good in the world, but we're also sometimes we're sensitive, sometimes we're damaged. We come from weird backgrounds, and so it just, because we're just so emotionally complex and also intelligent, it's also a very intelligent community here. There are more complex societal problems. And I really needed to hear that because it helped me.
They're about as emotionally complex as a third grader, basically. They're emotionally complex. And they're intellectually complex too, as you can hear. But that's who's running the show, folks. I mean, that's the brain trust. I hate to, I've been up with the PhD crowd. That's where I worked for in New York for 20 years with the PhD, the Yale, the Harvard, and Princeton. That's them. That's Anthony Blinken or Pencil Neck Ned Flanders or Ned, whatever his name is, Ned Price, the Pentagon spokesman. Kamala Harris. If you think there's a brain operating behind Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and AOC, and they know what they're doing, they know about as much as about the world, the real world, that they're throwing troops and nuclear weapons in our strategic oil reserve, as these characters, these narcissistic, navel-gazing assholes that are all in the wealthy parts of Aspen and the ski resorts, Vail and Boulder, and wherever these emotionally complex people are that are fascinated with each other in the Boulder collective, or, that they're going to save the world. They don't know what's going on in the world. They didn't even know a real world exists. Send them down here. I'll show you where they should send them. Down to Arizona. They should really send them down to the border. I think they should bus the immigrants into Boulder and take the people of Boulder and bus them down to the border. And you'd get a whole new policy coming out of these think tanks of medicated psychos.
Willing to try maybe to get a second job out there, I would just have to let them know that it would have to be after 4 o'clock. I would come home, take a little shower, get dressed into the different clothes, and I would go to my next job. And I would just put that money away and treat it like I don't even have it, so that you can hurry up and build and figure something out. Yeah, there's not really much. It's not really much, but it's what we got. So
it's basically a studio?
Got a stove and refrigerator.
All right.
A little stove.
And this is everything that comes with, of course.
This was here. This was all right there. Stove doesn't really work, so we go about more the microwave that you thing and buy about a house.
So everything that you do in your microwave and everything?
For the most part, yeah. Or it's bought from a restaurant. Working at Burger King, I kind of get the little hook up and able to.
Oh, y'all hear these whoppers like a mug.
Cheeseburgers and lobsters. Yeah.
Hey, those my those my first gig. I worked at Burger. I used to love work. Those my favorite out of all my jobs, working at Burger King, man.
A lot of those too. A lot of those ramen noodles.
All right.
Like some little peanut butter sandwiches, and we got the little big jellies if we need jelly or we want jelly, some salsa. Just doing it like we can, doing what we can out of it. So that's basically what I live out of up there, like backpacking that double bag in that bag. That's me.
And then that's the.
Yeah,
Do they give you any type of accommodation since the stove isn't working? Do they do anything about it? Like, of course they're not fixing it, but do they show any love? Like take anything off the price or anything? Because that's not working.
I don't believe so. It is what it is.
Word.
They did have a refrigerator that was in the top part. It was just like this small refrigerator we were trying to force everything into. So we were kind of getting a larger size refrigerator here. Got the little toaster oven type thing.
Right.
Microwave. You get to that, so we know how to use it. We know how to make it work and have it.
All right. And then this right here is the basically chill area. That's your dresser and whatnot.
Yes.
And then that's your
that's the bathroom. Yeah, bathroom. That's where the shower is.
What's up with the TV? Y'all get cable? Or
Yeah.
And do y'all have internet?
Yes, they do have a Wi-Fi here.
Yeah, I don't want some shit.
Okay.
You got a Roku box, though.
Yeah, I got my older brother left his Roku box thing here, so we can watch
whatever y'all want to.
It's all right there, same thing. But yeah, their Wi-Fi here is very weak, very weak signal, so make it work with what we have. Yeah, so we got a little shower thing that just fixed it. Well, they didn't fix it all the way, but they fixed it as good as they could. They put that on like a plug to make it where it's a shower. That's what it was working with.
Welcome home, man. Hey, where would you have to do your time, bro?
Tucson, Lewis, Douglas, Florence, Keenan.
Blacks and white can't eat together and kick it in the pen.
It just matters who you are, to be honest. It matters who you are. If you got some status, you're going to be able to do whatever the fuck you want.
You got status?
I got away with a lot.
Did you, man?
Yeah.
Word.
Yeah, but I also got cracked a lot, too.
When you say crack, what you mean?
Head busted.
Did you?
Discipline, I guess you call it, right?
From your own?
Yeah.
Who'd you plug in with?
I ran with the white boys.
Did you, man?
Yeah.
All right. Are you Aryan or anything like that?
No. It's just you can have touchdown, you can run with somebody, and fucking you got it out the way, pretty much.
Word. Put that 6 in. You back.
Yeah.
All right, man. You good? You good to go?
Yeah. It's different out here, shit. Yeah, take my ass to work, shit. Gotta do it.
You was working in there?
No. Oh yeah, I was a librarian in there, but that was a lot easier than this.
Word.
I'm breaking my back out here.
Right. What'd you go to jail for?
Robberies.
Stores and shit, or?
Yeah, stores, phone stores, Circle Keys, you name it.
Right. You chilling now?
Yeah.
All right.
And that's who's living in Boulder. I mean, the woman talking bullshit there that's living in Boulder, all the same people are living all over the parks and all over the streets. So I'll see if I can find the Boulder reality that these people are not telling anybody about. I don't know if maybe they don't see it. Maybe it's just maybe these people are invisible to them. I think they are.
Oh shit! Man, look!
I have food stamps for the government.
Oh yeah.
And also, it has to be known that Boulder sweeps people off. They get rid of the homeless. These are people who keep coming back and freeze in the winter. The other cities, like Denver, is filled with homeless camps and everything else. So it's not allowed in Boulder. So they can be arrested or what have you. That's how much Boulder care. They care about as much for the homeless as the people in Martha's Vineyard. That it's always the upper wealthy that talk about how much they care about the homeless, but they come anywhere near these security villages or compounds or wealthy enclaves where the ruling elite, the Obamas, the Kennedys, and that live. They're sent. They're deported back to Arizona so they can live in. Pay $1,700 a month for ex-cons to live and work at Burger King. So that's the real America that the PhD university professors teach. We have to have a revolution. They should really, like I say, the revolution should start with all of these faculty members who get paid so much to preach the revolution, and they're politicians, the AOCs, and they should go down to the border and then let the homeless, who are actually working. That's another slander against the homeless. These people that all they can do, they're working as hard as they can, working 2 jobs. I worked with janitor jobs, and everybody was working. When I was in Madison, we had the same revolutionaries. I was working a working class janitor job in a union, and the people I was working with, they worked on the farms during the day, and they needed to work 2 jobs. This is back in the 80s, in the Reagan days. So to say that, with Reagan coming in saying that you can get all the jobs and the newspapers are filled with jobs. Sure they are for minimum wage, and farms don't make that much. So they work, 2 jobs. That's the reality of America, really. And now they have to work 3 jobs. And then they have to go overseas. And if they can get it employed that's in the military, they can learn a skill. And this is not real. This prosperity, it's simply a big credit card splurge with people that have a flotilla of credit cards, that they maintain this overpriced lifestyle, that their job, they get laid off, just like the Twitter people. I wonder if they're going to show up, which is where they should show up, being censors, of information. Is all they're paid to do, is censor information. Even everybody knew that and knows it, except for the people doing the mighty job of bringing socialism to America, which is really communism. There's no such thing as socialism. I don't know what social. Oh, there's national socialism, so you could call it that. Yeah, national socialism. That's anyway. That's my reality check for this evening. God bless everybody.